Welcome back. You're now watching the political segment on the weekend show. Every year, while we have new resolutions and new plans for what we intend to achieve and do in the new year, we also have the governments where they have a budget and they also have a responsibility to the people on expectations which the people have. And a lot of it is tied to how successful and important the government takes those things as priorities. In line with what we're doing, I'm having a conversation with Mayowa Tijani, who's a journalist and director of Projects Cable Foundation, who is also our economic analyst on the weekend show to give us the projections for 2025. Good morning, Mayowa, and Happy New Year.
Good morning, Auntie, and Happy New Year to you too. It's quite a pleasure to be back on the show this 2025.
It is. It's always good having you here because a lot of your predictions and projections always do come to pass. And so I'm interested in knowing what you think about 2025. The most important part to start with is the 2025 budget. What do you think about the total figure for this budget? Also, it being pegged at $1,500, 1,500 naira to a dollar.
Right. But of course, I think that one thing that is obvious to all of us is that this is the biggest budget we've had in the country's history. And maybe that's looking at it on the Naira terms. As at some 10 years ago, our budget was in the range of 4, 5 trillion. And of course, 10 years after, we are seeing times 10 of that. And this is like what we have right now. There are still possibilities that this budget or supplementary addition as we go along the year would actually cross the 50 trillion naira mark. I think that the government is trying to say that it's focusing on education, security, which are like the guys with biggest amount in the budget. But the reality is that putting the benchmark at 1,500 at a time when the dollar to naira is going at about 1,600, 1,650 is not particularly the best thing to do. But I guess that the government is also optimistic that they are going to be able to bring down the exchange rate. Oil production assumption is also at 2 million barrels per day, 2.06 million barrels per day, which is also not realistic considering that even the best that we've had in recent times is about 1.8 million barrels per day. So I'm hoping that some form of changes can still come into this entire system before we get this across the line. And maybe that would give us something pretty realistic. But it's a big budget. It's a defining year for the Tinubu administration, and we'll see what happens from there.
Mario, talking about oil, I remember just a couple of days ago we had an interview by former President Olusegun Obasanjo where he repeated something which I've heard a couple of times, that one of the reasons why we don't get a lot of investment in our refineries and why it doesn't work is the fact that the capacity of the refineries which we have, Warri, Port Harcourt, is just way too small for any investment, which means whatever we are looking at is still largely and highly dependent on Dangote, who joined the rest of Nigerians to become a whaler in 2024. What's your take on President Obasanjo's interview and about our production capacity based on the refineries that we have?
Right. President Obasanjo has told the story many times, and the reality is that there's more evidence to his side of the story than what the government of the day is trying to make us believe. Since 2000, and in fact, I think it was about 28 years since the last time that any of these refineries actually functioned really well or at good capacity. And now we say that, okay, the refinery is back, at least the Port Harcourt refinery is back, and is performing at, according to the president, is performing at 60% capacity. And in the world we live in today, a lot of international refineries, global best practice, is upwards of 80%, some even as high as 90, 95%. So we cannot particularly say that the refineries are working at the optimum capacity that they were sort of built to operate. But the reality is that I think that some credit should also be given to this government that since 2007 or even earlier, these refineries have just been going through one turnaround maintenance or the other, but not really producing anything. And so, if a government is coming on board and able to produce even 1 liter of petrol from those refineries, maybe it's something to consider. What I think I'll be more interested in going forward would be what the finances of this refinery would look like. So, if you're giving the refinery 100,000 barrels of oil and is giving us X amount of petrol, X amount of kerosene or not, I want to look at the finances. Are we making money? Are we making profit? Even if it's social benefits kind of profit, are we getting that? Or are we in a situation where we are just pouring money into a system that burns money? And of course, this is a situation we've been before. The former Minister of Petroleum, Ibe Kachuku, once said that the refinery should be sold because um, they were not performing at optimum quality, at optimum capacity. And of course, for someone who has worked in ExxonMobil's for decades, he had I felt like his decision was the better one at the time. But of course, politics always trumps economics. And that has kept the refineries with the government till date. So it will be good to look at the books and see what the numbers are. But I don't know if the NNPC will be willing to release any of that.
Talking about books, on the 20th of January, the United States would have a new president sworn in. There are predictions that the dollar is going to get stronger. What does this mean for Nigeria since we use the dollar as a benchmark for almost everything we do?
Right. The dollar is definitely going to get okay. Let me not be definite about it, but the dollar is expected to get stronger. We've seen it in the past since the election. The dollar has gotten stronger, and some new records have been broken. And if Trump sort of delivers on most of the things he campaigned on, in fact, maybe not most, but some of them, the dollar is expected to get even stronger. And of course, that sort of would weigh on the naira because, of course, there's now some pressure, but the good side of it is that the Central Bank of Nigeria has sort of been shoring up our reserves over the past couple of months. And now we are around 41 billion dollars. If we continue, in fact, I was doing a chart yesterday where I was sort of trying to project where we are going if we continue at the current rate. And if that if that continues, we might not be affected as much as maybe would have been a year ago or 2 years ago.
I like that you brought that up because I also had this conversation a couple of days ago that something quite impressive this government is doing is 2015 going forward. A lot of conversations from Nigeria was about our reserves. And so I remember this government had met it at about 34 billion. And then within the early days, 2 billion went out of it. But now they've been able to get it as high as 40 and 41 billion dollars, which what you have said has answered my question by putting into perspective that that does help Nigeria a lot. I know with our reserves now, the country can run for 9 to 13 months without any help and all whatnot. But while I was having this conversation just yesterday, my friend asked me that, Andy, so if we have $40 billion in our reserve, why is our president taking loans of 1.1 billion, of $2 billion? Explain this to the average Nigerian who doesn't understand how that works.
Right. So the Central Bank of Nigeria and the government of Nigeria are two separate entities. Now, the money with the central bank cannot be used to fund government operations as many people might expect. The reality is that if that were the case, let's think about it on the basis of these budgets. The current budget we have is almost showing, I think, a little over $20 billion.
Yeah,
So if we remove $20 billion um, from
reserve.
our national reserves to say we want to fund the budget, that puts us in a very vulnerable position that we don't want to be in the country. Forgetting the fact that this is not even allowed by law. According to the law, the CBN is supposed to give an overdraft to the federal government to the tune of 5% of the revenue that the government made the previous year. So if the government made 100 million in 2024. CBN can only give the government $5 million in 2025 as overdraft, like as a loan. And the abuse of that system in the past government is basically what got us to where we are today. We are now in a situation where we borrowed too much from CBN, basically the whole printing money system that we saw in the last administration. And it's not good for the naira, it's not good for the Nigerian economy. So I think that people should not look at the money with CBN as money that belongs to the federal government, but look at it as money that the CBN is using to help the average Nigerian or the businessman in Nigeria settle foreign exchange transactions outside the country.
Mayo, one of the reasons why I like talking to you is that I actually always learn from you and you break it down to the average Nigerian. I mean, it helps that you are a writer. But you've mentioned the CBN twice in this conversation. So CBN is doing what they're doing. We have reserves. The last government, Ways and Means, there was a lot of unnecessary spending and printing of money. Mayowa, why is there no money in circulation in Nigeria? Why can't people go to the bank and get access to their money? Most banks will tell you they can give you a maximum of 40,000 naira, even if you have 10 million naira in your account. Most of them will tell you that the ATMs you can only withdraw maybe 10,000 naira in a day. Now, for me, I'm very digital, and so I could always do transfer. And the likes of OPay, MoneyPoint, and the rest have made payment easier. And I'm very pro fintech. But as an average Nigerian, I'll be worried if I have, say, 500,000 naira in my account and I go to a bank who is meant to keep my money for me, and the bank tells me you can have only access to 40,000 naira, whatever. Explain this to me.
So I think that that is fundamentally a problem. However, one of the things that the CBN is also trying to do, and maybe not even just the CBN, previous leadership of CBN and this one, is we are also trying to sort of reduce the amount of cash within the system. Now, one of the problems that you must have seen from the whole Naira redesign situation was that when that Naira design sort of came up, we found people having Ghana must go big bags of stack of naira cash that they were keeping in their homes, they were using for future proofing or whatever. Now, the problem with that kind of money is that the CBN cannot trace it, CBN cannot track it. There's no um, electronic trail for seeing, oh, the money has gone from A to B, the money is used for C or D. But when we have a situation where is more of a cashless system, for every POS transaction you have, there is a trail. For every transfer you make to a friend or a family or a business, there is a trail. For every sort of there's some form of accountability within the system in that sense. Also, when this new CBN governor came on board, one of the problems he had was that the money supply, the amount of money that was outside the banking system was a lot. So when CBN is trying to control inflation, increasing interest rates, and doing all the things that the Monetary Policy Committee does, it only affects, or for the most part, it affects the money that is within the system that is traceable, that you can track. A lot of those hard cash that are in people's homes and houses and all that are not affected as much. And the CBN does not know how much to work with. So imagine someone having 1 billion naira in cash from 10 years ago, and somehow the system is supposed to track that. But if the cash has moved from one hand to another hand to another hand to another hand within that system without any record of it, it becomes problematic for the CBN. However, I do not support the fact that people can only get to withdraw 40,000 on ATM machine. You can only move 20,000 at a time. We both lived in this country at a time where you could do a lot more. And since these charges started coming up, 65 naira on this, 10 naira on that, it became better for the banks to have multiple transactions done. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that they now put like a leash on it that you can't go beyond 20,000 when you're withdrawing from an ATM. And even most of the ATMs don't work again as much as they should. So I feel like there's a problem there, but there's also a cashless policy that the CBN is chasing at the same time.
Mayowa, the tax reform bill has been a huge conversation, and so we must talk about it. And most people's opinions about the tax reform bills are more personal than political or economical. One thing which this government has been adamant about is the fact that this bill has come to stay. And so all you see are them trying to remind you. So I read an article yesterday where it says about 80% of Nigerians will pay lesser tax with this reform bill. So the advisor to the president has really been trying to talk about it and explain this to people. But I remember earlier last year there was a World Bank loan which Nigeria got, and a lot of the conditions of that loan was tied to tax reforms. Do you think that's why the government has said this is here to stay? Whatever you are saying, we just have to get this done.
Right. So I do not necessarily think that the government is doing it because of the World Bank. I think that the Bola Tinubu of Lagos is a tax guy. He probably would do as much as possible to get revenue up. And coming on board and appointing Taiwo Edele almost immediately sort of gave credence to that personality. And so the tax reform is something that I personally believe that should go ahead. Maybe not exactly with the terms that is being given right now. Maybe not. Maybe there might be a few changes here and there, but overall, it's something that has to be done. Now, one of the things that is happening right now is that there's a lot more politics to it than the actual economics of it. So we have a situation where people who are earning minimum wage in Nigeria are paying certain amount of taxes, almost similar to people who are earning billions and millions of naira. Now, that in itself, in a system that sort of tries to be egalitarian, is not right. So, if there's a tax reform bill that is saying people earning minimum wage are not going to be paying taxes, they are going to get their full 70,000 or full 75,000, as the case may be, then for that kind of person, it is good. But one of the fears that people also have is that if we increase VAT, for example, if we increase VAT to maybe 10 or 15% for certain goods and exclude some certain goods. So, for example, if we brought VAT on food to zero and we brought VAT on processed food to 15, there would be vendors across the country who would charge 15% VAT on the food that is supposed to be 0% and the food that is supposed to be 15%. So enforcement might be difficult. So there's a lot that's it's just the general Nigerian mistrust. We don't particularly trust that government would see this thing through. And of course, I also do not totally trust it. But our tax system, the way it is, I did a story, I think in 2015 or 2016, analyzing all the taxes that we have to pay in Nigeria. And in a state like Lagos State, as at the time, we had taxes as high as 50 different taxes and levy that people had to pay. The World Bank had a report on that too afterwards that also highlighted the amount of taxes that people pay in Kano, in Lagos, in some of these urban centers. And these tax reform bills sort of try to address a lot of those problems. So there is a lot of good to it, but a lot of politics is also there in the mix and a lot of lack of trust on the side of the citizens.
Mayowa, the Russian year report has always come up. This administration last year said we're cutting down per house XYZ in 12 weeks. It's been over 40 weeks since we had that. What's your
So
take,
you,
especially when you're talking tax reform, you're talking about being more frugal, the president is telling us to be patient, this is necessary. We've not seen any workings from their end, especially with that pronouncement.
right. So the reality with Nigeria is that I say this often. Nigeria is a republic that replays itself. So we are basically on auto replay. When the Tinubu administration came up with the whole conversation around, oh, we are going to implement the Orange report and blah, blah, blah. A lot of us who had been around for a couple of years, we have seen previous administration do the same. Buhari did the same. Goodluck Jonathan did the same. And maybe the next guy is going to do the same thing. Whenever I hear about this, I do not expect any of it to work because the way the civil service is sort of structured right now um, is going to always fight back. Now, if a president is not willing to fight when that fighting back happens, then we are not going to have anything. That's one. Then number two, there's also political interest, political reality to say, okay, I have to pay back this person, or I have to oil this person's hand ahead of the next election. And so, with all those interests in place, governments are going to create more ministries. Governments are going to look for more opportunities, more parastatals that they can fix their people in ahead of the next elections. So I had said it, I had written about it. I have no faith in any government that is seeking re-election to do anything about the RSI report. It's just always going to be a feel good that they are going to whip up at any point in time when there's public discontent. If you watch the time at which this information was put out, it was one of those times where the Tinubu administration was really experiencing a low.
Yeah.
There were a lot of complaints about president health, about the finances, about the way things were going, and then oh yeah, give them our survey reports, and then they gave us, and then we discussed that for another couple of weeks, months, and everybody moves on. So I don't think I'm expecting anything from that
I,
end, even
I
in
think my
2020.
biggest problem with that report is a part which a lot of Nigerians don't think about when they talk of it. The fact that if you're going to scrap some of those parastatals MDs, thousands of Nigerians are going to lose jobs. And one of the worst things you can do is kick out civil servants from work because you're trying to improve the economy. Because for them, they'll be like, you better get rid of your 30-car convoy and all whatnot. But that part about the fact that it would also lead to a lot of job loss, it's hardly spoken about. So I do agree with you that when I think about that report, for me, I'm like, are you guys thinking about where you move these people to if you are scrapping
So
some of these places?
one of the things that happens when these statements are made, and this also happened with the Tinubu government, is that when they say this, they will now say, uh, no, there will be no job losses as many of these ministries will emerge. Now, when you say there will be no job losses, the problem with that is this ministry, for example, has a, let's even take a simple one, a driver to the minister. Now, the other ministry also has a driver to the minister. Now, so you merge both ministries and they now have one minister but two drivers, just for example. That's duplication.
Yeah.
And in most cases, when they merge, if they merge any ministry, they still keep both ministers. One minister is minister of state, the other one is substantive minister, and both of them still keep their drivers. So the whole cost cutting that we say we want to do actually does not happen. We actually need like a personally, and of course, maybe this is me being a capitalist. I'm not against people losing their jobs in terms of when it comes to us trying to be frugal and all, but it needs to be across board. The president cannot drive a 30-car convoy and then merge a ministry that saves $5,000. It just cannot work that way.
Mayowa, before I let you go, and so we're done with the economic projections in Nigeria. So what I'm doing this month is having conversations with my friends who are brilliant in their spaces, but I end it with my three of three, which is one, what three things do you want to start doing in 2025? What three things do you want to stop doing in 2025? And what three things are you proud of yourself from the previous year? So we'll start with the first and rapid fire. Three things you want to start doing in 2025. But for you, you have a bit of a leeway. You can make it personal, or you can make it things Nigeria or the Nigerian government should do in 2025
Okay.
in your space. So let's start
Thank
with
you for
things we
giving me
should do
the
in
leeway.
2025. Yeah.
Yeah, so three things I think that the Nigerian government should do in 2025. Number one is to be very serious with the foreign exchange system, sort of make the naira stronger. We seem to be on a good path with that, even though a lot of that can be blamed on Christmas and IJGB and all of that. And Eurobond raise, but like be more serious with the FX system so that Naira gets stronger. Number two, maybe for me and maybe for Nigerians, we need to stop bet. We need to stop betting against the Naira. When the Naira was going down when the Naira was going up last month, a lot of Nigerians were buying the dollar,
To
hoping
hold.
that it would come back in January and all of that. So we need to stop betting against Naira, number two. Number three is that we need to hold our lawmakers more accountable. Now we have a 49 trillion budget. There are a few problems that we are talking about. The benchmarks are not great. And this is some of the things that Nigeria should change. But we see that every time we keep repeating the same cycle. So that's one thing we should change. What's the second
Three
one?
things you want to stop doing,
Uh,
or you want Nigeria to stop doing.
Oh, I've sort of mixed it,
Yeah,
but
but
uh,
that still makes
yeah,
sense.
okay. So the last one is three things I'm proud of from last year.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm proud of the progress recorded at the CBN.
Okay.
How our foreign reserve is basically gradually going up. I'm also proud of the how the government, so to say, so far has has insisted on some of the things that they want to do. For example, the tax reform bill. In the past, with an election in view, this kind of bill would probably have died by now, but they are insisting, and that's something that we really don't see a lot within the system. Um, I being proud maybe of myself, I'm proud of how much interest I have come to have, not just in Nigeria, but in the opportunities that we're able to create basically for individuals within the country, thinking about investing, thinking about financial literacy in whatever way that fits. And yes, I'm proud of myself, of whatever I say on this show that makes you invite me over and over again. So thank you very much.
Mayowa Tijani is a writer, a journalist, is head of project for Cable Foundation. He is, and we forced this job on Mayowa. Mayowa was forced to become, Mayowa, sorry, was forced to become economic analyst together with Paul Adaji on the weekend show. So whenever we need any clarifications about the economy and Nigeria, Mayowa Tijani, you've always been there. We're not letting you go. You'll always be here for us. We'll have another conversation. On the Democracy Day to take stock of what the president has done after 2 years. But thank you so much for always being there for us and joining us. That's how much we can take on the political segment. After this break, Tenda Chimelu is back with Entrepreneur Spotlight. Don't go away.